Policy and Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, May 13th, 2021. Time is at 6:30. And I've got a script here to read. So welcome. Let's see, due to the virtual format of today's meeting, I'd like to start by providing some guidelines. We have participants attending by computer and others who may be attending by phone. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If having technical issues, try joining the meeting using a different device such as a smartphone or tablet. Use the call-in feature in the meeting invite to call into the meeting. Okay, and for tonight's overview, we'll be holding elections for a new chair and vice chair, receiving trainings regarding PPC's bylaws, the Open Public Meetings Act, and public hearing process and procedures. Then we will hear a presentation from Gary Schmick, the city's utilities engineer and manager, regarding the upcoming storm surface and water management plan. And for attendance, Kristen, do you want to go ahead and call the roll?
Yes, if you all will just unmute and say here when I call your name, please. Commissioner Lewis? Here. Commissioner Milligan?
Here.
Commissioner Monahan?
Here.
Commissioner Vader?
Here.
Commissioner Voice?
Here.
Commissioner Zaragoza?
Here.
And Commissioner Fowl?
Here.
All are present.
All right, excellent. And so let's go ahead and join or welcome Sarah Bader, our new PPC commissioner. Hello. So I'm not going to put you on the spot, but you got 30 seconds to tell us something about you and your favorite trail in Issaquah.
Okay, good question. So hi everyone, I'm Sarah Vader. Let's see what to say about me in 30 seconds. We've lived in Issaquah for about a year and a half, so we're pretty new. I have a 6-year-old, and because of that, my favorite trail is the Swamp Trail on Tiger Mountain. We have a lot of fun there. So that's probably my answer. Those are the trails right behind my house on Cougar Mountain. Nice to meet you.
Very cool. Welcome aboard.
Thanks.
All right, and now we're going to move to the approval of the minutes. Are there any corrections to the April 22nd, 2021 minutes provided in the agenda packet?
Hey, Ron, one clerical issue. My name does not have a G in it, so if we could remove the G, that would be great.
Excellent. Yes, good point. Okay. Any other corrections or comments to be noted? Okay, hearing none, the minutes are now approved with the clerical correction for Matt Monahan. Okay, and now we're moving on to regular business. We are going to move into the election of the chair and vice chair. And first I will call for nominations. Would anybody like to nominate anybody? Okay, hearing none.
Commissioner Boyce.
Sorry. Go ahead, Jace.
Commissioner Boyce, I'm going to go ahead and nominate Mr. Fowl, who's done an incredible job as our acting chair, except for when he tried to take us back to 2020 moments ago. Other than that, great job.
Thank you for not crucifying me for that. I don't want to go back another year. Thank you very much. Any other nominations? Nina? You're on mute.
My thing up in the air. Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I'll nominate Jason Voice as vice chair.
Excellent. Are there any other nominations?
Excuse me. We're just doing nominations for chair right now. And we'll do that. We'll do that vote first, and then we'll go on to vice chair.
Okay. Any other nominations for chair? Would anybody like to run for chair? Not asking for competition, but okay. So, Kristen, do you want to go ahead and take a vote?
Yes, I will. So we are voting for Ron Fall for chair, and say yay or nay when I call your name, please. Commissioner Lewis.
Yay.
Commissioner Milligan.
Yay.
Commissioner Monahan.
Yay.
Commissioner Vader.
Yay.
Commissioner Boyce.
Yay.
Commissioner Zaragoza.
Yay.
Commissioner Fall.
Yay.
All right, unanimously, with 7 votes, Commissioner Fall is our new chair.
Thank you all, and I will not fail you. I will definitely learn what I need to learn to do an excellent job. All right, and now we'll move on to vice chair. And do we hear any nominations beyond Nina's for Jason Voice? Okay, hearing none. Kristen, you want to go ahead and call the roll?
Yes, voting on Jason Voice for vice chair. So when I call your name, please unmute. Commissioner Lewis.
Yay.
Commissioner Milligan.
Yay.
Commissioner Monahan.
Yay.
Commissioner Bader.
Yay.
Commissioner Boyce.
Yay.
Commissioner Zaragoza.
Yay.
And Commissioner Fall.
Absolutely. I mean, yay.
All right, with 7 votes, Commissioner Jason Voice is our new vice chair.
Congratulations, Jason. Okay, thank you, Kristen, for calling the vote. And we're now moving on to training for tonight. Okay, and that's going to be with Tina Eggers.
Hi,
Thank you, Tina.
thank you. Good evening, Chair, Commissioners. I'm Tina Eggers. I'm your City Clerk. And first, thank you, all of you, for your valuable service to the community. Issaquah is certainly a great place to live and work. I have 25 plus years in local government, 17 of those here in Issaquah. Let's see. So we're going to do some training tonight. We're always available for questions outside of your meetings. And if you find that you'd like us to return at some point in the future, we're happy to do that too. Joining me this evening is our city attorney. Mr. Haney, would you like to say hello and make an introduction?
Yes, good evening. I'm Jim Haney. I'm the city attorney for the city of Issaquah. I have been the city attorney now for, I think, about 3 years, or maybe it's 4 years now. I can't remember. But I've been with my firm for 38 years and have worked with the city of Issaquah a number of times in the past. I took over for Wayne Tanaka when Wayne retired a few years back. So I'm happy to be here to help you and to work with you on the training. And I look forward to hearing what Tina has to say, because I always learn something when I speak to city clerks. They know where everything, how everything should be managed. And it's always nice to work with a clerk with as much experience as Tina.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, so give me a moment here. And then someone else, our Deputy City Clerk, Tisha Geezer, could not make tonight's meeting, but she's a great resource as well. And I thank her for her help in putting this presentation together. So here we go. You should be seeing my screen. If someone wouldn't mind confirming that, that would be great.
Yes,
We can see
it.
your screen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. See if I can navigate my multiple screens here with success. All right. So tonight we're going to cover open government training components, which is the public meetings and public records. We're also going to go over your code of ethics, the roles of the members, some of your meeting procedures, public hearings, and your legislative process. So the first part of the presentation covers, and I'm going to ask Jim if you could mute. Yep, there we go. Make sure that we don't have some duplicate sound happening. Oops, there we go. All right. So the first part of the presentation covers some important state laws. These laws are relevant to the service that you do as a commissioner. The second half of the presentation will cover specific processes of your commission. So let's talk about the Sunshine Laws, which are referred to as the Open Government Trainings Act. This is, again, relevant to the service that you do as a commissioner. The training is mandated by state law and consists of 3 elements. It consists of the Open Public Meetings Act and public records and records management. So the intent of this training is to increase knowledge of the laws and responsibilities of jurisdictions and those who perform various duties, staff, council, and appointed officials like yourselves. The State Auditor's Office is looking to reduce findings, decrease violations, and cities, of course, are looking to reduce risk. The State Auditor's Office has found that most violations are not malicious, they're not intentional, that the violations resulted from insufficient training or knowledge. So again, the act, the state law is intended to foster open government education and to reduce liability. So OPMA, you've probably heard that from time to time. For our newest members, that stands for the Open Public Meetings Act. Really the intent of that is that your meetings are open from start to finish. We also refer to that as gavel to gavel. The idea is the public has the right to attend, to observe your decision-making process. So for in-person meetings, that means we have to have an accessible meeting space that's open to the public. However, at this time, of course, we're in a virtual world, a virtual meeting. This means that we must provide an opportunity or pathway for the public to attend virtually as well. Your meetings are also recorded. They're live streamed and they're aired on our YouTube channel and also channel 21. For all meetings, advance notice to the public is required. There's few exemptions when a meeting may be closed to the public, but those are very few. And I'll speak briefly to executive sessions a bit later in the presentation. But really, I want to ensure that you are operating within OPMA, and again, in the spirit of being open and transparent. So you have 2 categories for your meetings. They'll either fall into regular or special meetings. Your regular meetings are already defined. Those are defined as your 2nd or 4th Thursday of the month. The time stamp for those is a start time of 6:30 p.m. and the location is the council chambers. Although again, right now, due to the governor's declared COVID-19 emergency and related health and public safety concerns, we are allowed to hold our meetings entirely virtually. However, that will change as we advance through the phases of recovery. So again, your regular meetings would fall into this center bracket. Anything that was held outside of that date, time, or location is considered a special meeting. You may also refer to special meetings as work sessions, workshops, retreats. It could be a training, the list goes on. But regardless, all meetings must include an agenda and minutes. Agendas must be posted at a minimum of 24 hours before your meeting. Of course, we strive for greater access than that. So we strive for 5 days in advance of your meeting. And although public comment is not required by state law, we do find it valuable and is included as part of your agenda. Let me go back for a moment. I should note that for special meetings, it's important that if the commission was going to be taking final action on an item, that the agenda would have had properly stated that action that would be considered. If that action was not clearly identified on that special meeting or special meeting notice, then that item would have to be carried over to one of your regular meetings or to another special meeting that could be properly noticed. So I mentioned portions of the meeting that could be closed to the public. This is very rare. There's very few exceptions when a meeting could be closed. We refer to these as executive sessions. Council, boards, or commissions may only use this for the purposes that are identified by state law. And when allowed, it's for discussion only. No action may be taken within the closed session. And some examples that you might see are city council recessing into executive session would be for discussing litigation or property acquisitions. There's some other avenues that are provided under the state law. But again, this is something that we would rarely see for this board or commission. And if we found that you needed one, we would work to properly notice it, provide the proper announcement to the chair, and we would ensure that the right individuals were present. So if it was litigation, our city attorney would be present to ensure that he was on hand to meet the state requirement. So OPMA also has quorum components to it. So it says you can meet as a quorum to conduct your work, and that if you had less than a quorum this evening, we would need to decide, do we pause and see if we can get a meeting together, or would we have to reconvene to another date and time? So 4 members constitutes a quorum for you. Of course, you are allowed to travel together for non-board business. You, of course, can get together for things like a potluck or summer get-together, so long as you are not discussing the business of the commission. So that's really important. And so much so in the spirit of the OPMA, we probably ask that you wouldn't group in groups of 3 or more. And again, keep your conversations not about the board or the board's business. State law defines the definition of action as very broad. So a lot of times I'll talk to boards and commissions and they'll say, but you know, we didn't take action. But under state law, action is broad. It's anything from public testimony, deliberations, discussions, which is why I underlined that word, considerations, reviews, evaluation, and final action. Again, we want to be mindful that you aren't inadvertently violating OPMA. We want to ensure that when you're communicating or receiving information that you are not violating OPM through an inadvertent reply all. So you can share information, and if you want information to be passed on to the commission, we ask that you do that through your staff liaison.
Tina,
yes.
I see that Commissioner Milligan has a question.
Certainly.
Thank you, Tina. Just back to the previous slide about special meetings. Did you want to comment on, because I can't remember what it is, the notice required if we have a special meeting? Is there public notice required, and what's the time frame for that?
Yes, that goes back here. Here's the slide you talked about. We have a minimum requirement of 24 hours before that meeting. We strive for longer, and we do 5 days or more in advance.
And so, I'm sorry, Tina, can I follow up? So I see the agendas, but even the scheduling of a meeting could be scheduled only 24 hours in advance?
I mean, that's the minimum. We certainly strive for longer.
Certainly.
And because of other components, which we'll talk about under your meeting process, you know, we're really looking to schedule meetings, you know, 2+ weeks in advance. But state law, this is sort of the minimum threshold that we can work under.
Well, and I would say you do live up to your standard, Tina. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right. So what we need to do is make sure that we're helping you stay within the parameters of OPMA and that you're helping each other as well. So if you have some information that you'd like to share with the commission, please send that through your staff liaison so that they can share it on your behalf. We ask that you do not reply all with your perspective of the issue or the item. Save that discussion for a board meeting. Do not communicate outside of the meeting that's specific to commission business in a matter that would violate OPMA. So it means if you're communicating in groups of 4, that's a no-no. If you're doing that in a way that is a string or a series, we want to make sure that you aren't doing that, and that could be a combination of things. So it could be you chatting with another member about board business, whether that's in person, and then you use that same conversation to phone another commissioner, and then maybe someone else in that group emails another commissioner on that item. Again, that would be considered a series string meeting and in violation of OPMA. So again, save your conversations for less than a quorum and really save the conversations for the board meeting. There are some penalties, and so normally I'm comfortable walking through this item, but with our attorney here and this having liability, I'll let him speak to it.
Thank you, Tina. Before we get to the penalties, I just want to make a couple of comments on the things that Tina has said. She's done a great job summarizing the OPMA, but just a couple of things. One, following up on Commissioner Milligan's question, the minimum under state law, the minimum notice for a special meeting is 24 hours. It has to be given in 24 hours in advance in writing to all of the commissioners and also to the local media who has requested to be notified. So that's the minimum. You can always do more than that, but that's the minimum that state law requires. Second, I wanted to say with respect to the OPMA and virtual meetings, the governor announced today, and you probably saw this, but the governor announced today that we're looking at a full reopening of the state June 30th. And I'm not entirely sure what that's going to mean for open public meetings, whether we'll be back to normal or whether we'll still be allowed to have some virtual meetings. Currently, under law, you can have a public component to your meetings if you wish to do so, or an in-person component is the way I should put it, if you wish to do so, but you do have to allow a virtual option for people to attend, and you do have to make sure that everybody who is attending, whether they're doing it in person or virtually, that they have the opportunity to hear each other at the same time. And you also have some restrictions currently if you do allow an in-person component where you have to be, you have capacity issues where you can only have 50% capacity in the room or 400 people, whichever is less. And you can also, they must also be able to distance from each other. But again, we're not entirely sure what Governor Inslee means by a full reopening. At least I haven't had a chance to listen to his press conference. I just saw the headlines, and we'll have to look at that to see what we need to do as of June 30th, and we'll keep you advised. The other comment on what Tina was talking about is the serial meeting. And I would just make you aware that the prohibition on serial meetings, and particularly on email meetings, comes from a case in which some school board members in a school district were having conversations via email that occurred over several days. And those conversations were emails back and forth, CCing the entire group, having the group participate in those email exchanges. And even though not everybody was in a room or in a chat room or virtually online in some way at the same time, that sort of serial meeting that occurred via email was deemed to be a violation of the OPMA. So that's something to just keep in mind, that time is not an issue. It's really what the commission is doing and whether you are having a discussion of commission business over with more than a quorum involved. So Tina got to tell you all the good things about the OPMA, and I get to tell you the bad things and what happens to you if you violate it. I guess I get to be the cop on this one. So first of all, the OPMA is kind of unique in that it provides for individual personal liability on the part of commissioners and council members who violate the OPMA. It provides that you have to pay the penalty personally, and that the city is not supposed to pay the penalty for you. The individual liability under the OPMA is there is a $500 penalty for the first violation and a $1,000 penalty for subsequent violations. So that's real money, and you need to be careful not to violate the OPMA. There is also, if somebody brings a lawsuit against the city for violation of the OPMA, the city itself pays the other side's costs and attorney's fees, and that can be very expensive. Generally, there is not a cause of action where you can get damages if you're a person who believes that there is a violation of the OPMA, but you can have a court declare that the Open Meetings Act has been violated, and you get your costs and attorney's fees if you're right. So it can be substantial liability on the part of the city. And lastly, and most importantly, anything that you do in violation of the Open Public Meetings Act is null and void. So any action that you take just is null and void, and you have to come back and redo the action. You can do that. The court cases say that a board or commission that violates the OPMA has the ability to come back and ratify its earlier action and thereby make the action valid as long as they do the ratification in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. But it does mean that the action that you take is void in the first place until you come back and do that. So it wastes a lot of your time if you do that, and that's a penalty that you don't want to pay. So do you want to go on to the next slide, Tina? I think I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you. Again, we want to establish a culture of compliance and ensure that the OPMA rules are followed. So the second item under the Open Government Trainings Act is the Public Records Act. And it's been around for a long time too. It started in 1970 or 71 by the people of Washington State. And it said not only from the first part that they wanted access to your meetings, but that they also want access to public records. So housed under the RCW, which is the Revised Code of Washington 4256, and within our own municipal code 1.28, you will find reference to this act. I am your designated officer, that is the public records officer. And what I would say about this is we might get records requests from all sorts of folks. Could be media, could be a business owner, could be a developer, someone in a different jurisdiction, could be a neighbor, a homeowners association, whatever it is. The city has a responsibility to respond to the requester, to search for the records, preserve those records, and to release those records in a timely fashion. So how does this impact you? Well, there's a couple reasons. One is that anything that comes through the city email system is preserved and retained and searchable from my office. So I can help package up responsive records requests. However, there could be a time or a situation where personal email as a commissioner might need to be searched. If and when that were to happen, I would work with you, notify you. I would give you parameters. Again, it's about informing you, having you understand that there's a legal obligation for you to assist, search, preserve, and then again, I would work with you on transferring those records over to us. Again, it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, we follow a process and we will keep you informed. So what are some things that you can do just in the nature of the commission work that you do? We encourage you to stick to one email account as you work on your receiving your agendas or whatnot, rather than several. We encourage you to keep track of your records. So have a place where you, if you are printing things out, have a place that is designated in your work area where those go. If you are taking notes, which you certainly can, you have the right to delete them when they're no longer useful or needed by you. That is so long as a records request hasn't come in that was specific to your board or commission or materials. And again, if they were needed, I would work with you and the board to follow certain protocols. I would also take this platform to say, please please avoid text messaging at all possible. It's just another platform that isn't helpful in searching. It just complicates things. And best practices would be to avoid text. And if you were, use it for very minimal items like running late, on my way, out sick, something that is short and considered transitory. Is there anything that our attorney would like to add? Pausing to give our city attorney an opportunity if you wanted to clarify anything that you heard.
Sorry, I was on mute. No, I think you've covered it very well, Tina.
Okay, thank you.
Tina, I do see a
Yes.
question, however, from Jason Boyce.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Planner Lisa, and thank you, Ms. Eggers. So very briefly, real quick question. As far as if somebody makes a request for public records, you had mentioned parameters. So they wouldn't just be able to say, can I see every single email in your file for the last 10 years since you've had your, I want to see everything from your Hotmail and AOL days. They would have to give you parameters too, and also say, I'd like to see from the last year, from when they were discussing X, Y, and Z. I can't imagine it would be so broad as every email you've ever written.
Well, unfortunately, it is broad. So with that, we still try to work with the requester to come up with, they have to be, real records. They have to be reasonable. If it's clearly if they're asking for something that is so broad that we do work to help define what it is that they're asking for and what might be more helpful, particularly when we're talking about such voluminous, records that, it could take years to produce. So again, we'll do our best to help narrow the request, but if the requester fails to do that or chooses not to, and there are identifiable records within it, then we will proceed down the path of a long-term plan to provide them.
And I would just interject that there was a public records request that was going around a few years ago by an individual named Clemens, who was asking for basically every record that the city had. And that is not an identifiable request for request for identifiable public records. You really can't ask for everything, but you can ask for specific things. And as long as the request is specific enough so that we can locate the records and produce them, then that's going to be sufficient enough to be a valid public records request. The other thing I would say, and I spoke too soon when I said I didn't have any comments, but was one thing to keep in mind about public records is there are very, very significant penalties for not producing public records. And a court can award up to $100 per day per document for documents that are not produced in a timely manner in a public records request. Plus, individuals who prevail against the city in a lawsuit to seeking public records are entitled to their costs and their attorney's fees. So Public Records Act litigation and the failure to produce public records is a very significant liability for the city if it's not done in a timely manner. The other thing maybe to note is just that as Tina mentioned, there is a distinction between city email and personal email, but that distinction the request for public records can be both from your personal devices and from city devices. So just because you might have a city email on your personal device as opposed to in the city's email system, that doesn't mean it's not a public record. And I strongly advise you to make sure that all of your public records and correspondence go through the city so that the city can produce those records. We don't have to come to you and ask you to turn over your phone or turn over your computer so that we can search it, and so that we make sure that there's a clear distinction between your personal devices and the city system. So I think that's all I had to say.
Tina, I have questions from both Ron Fall and then Commissioner Monahan.
All right.
Commissioner Fall?
Oh, sorry, I'm on mute talking to myself. Thank you, Tina and James, for your information and scaring the daylights out of everybody. Question I have for clarification is if we wanted to do a retreat, say to not talk or discuss PPC business, but more or less to get to know each other like a holiday event, or we wanted to meet down at Formula Brewing and get to know each other, does that constitute a public event? Do we need to advertise that? Or is that something that you would strongly advise against?
Well, I can grab that one first, and then Jim can have some secondary comments. It really depends on how you structure that. So if it's intended to be like a team building event, then yes, we want to notice it and provide some structure and agenda. If it's really something that one of the commissioners is planning, just as a, hey, I'm having a function at my house and some neighbors, and you are also invited and your spouses, that would be fine so long as you were not discussing the business of the board or there in a way that was representing the board.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that, as Tina said, it really depends upon the purpose of your gathering. If the gathering is a social gathering, then you're not going to be required to advertise it and treat it as a public meeting as long as the business of the commission is not discussed. But if you have, for example, and I see this at retreats where you have a facilitator come and do team building exercises for you, that kind of thing is the commission's business. It's working with you to build how you react and how you work together, and that would require it to be a public meeting.
Thank you for the clarification.
Commissioner Monahan?
Thank you, Matt Monahan here. Jim, I think I'm going to direct these questions to you. I'm an attorney. I'm certainly not a municipal attorney, but I did set fire to the city hall of the city of Alexandria in Virginia back when I lived there it started with the FOIA and then it moved into just deposing everybody. So let me see if I got this right. If the city received an information request and you came to us and you asked us, does every single email you have concerning commission business, is somebody within the city CC'd such that it would be on the city server? Does that check the box such that we wouldn't have to turn over any personal emails to you at that point if we could assure you everything went through the city?
Yeah, what we generally do is when we receive a public records request, we'll send out that request to commissioners and ask you whether you have anything that is not on the city's servers and is not a city record. If you've got anything on your personal devices, and if you do have something on your personal devices, we would generally have you do an affidavit or a declaration that says, here's the records. I've produced everything on my personal device. I did the search, and Tina would give you the parameters that you should use to search your device. And we don't actually physically have to have your device. We can rely on you. Now, if there is Public Records Act litigation, there have been circumstances in which courts have said, okay, you have to turn over your device for inspection. But generally speaking, that is not the case. We don't ask to, we're of course ready, willing, and able. I think the city is to come to your aid if you need help searching and want IT to help you with your devices, but we don't necessarily come and get them. There have been circumstances where we have had, in litigation, had independent forensic experts look at council members' devices. So,
okay, great. And then a somewhat related question, which is, again, being the paranoid former litigator that I am, I had Kristen send all of my commission-related business to an email account I set up separate. So it's still a Gmail account, but I only conduct, everything that I get from Kristen and everybody else on staff goes to that email account, not to my personal email account. Is that something I could reference in the declaration saying, I did self-collect, I self-collected from this account because all of my commission business goes to this account? Would that hold up?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's a good idea to have that separate account for your correspondence. It enables you to produce your records very quickly because you can go to that account and know that's only what's in there. And it enables us to say, there's nothing on your personal devices or in your personal account. So I think that's a good idea.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Are we ready to move forward? Take that as a yes, unless I'm interrupted. All right, so the city has a code of ethics. We have a policy and we have some guidelines. It's available at issaquah.gov/ethics, where you can complete your name, that you've read it, that you understand it. If you've already submitted one, you don't need to do that again. We will keep that item on file for the duration of your term or terms on the commission. But I will tell you, there are some items that our city attorney will speak to. And again, the Code of Ethics reiterates the importance of following the Open Meetings and Public Meetings Acts. Mr. Haney?
Thank you, Tina. As Tina mentioned, there is a city ethics code. There is also a state ethics code. The state ethics code for city officials is relatively sparse. It mostly deals with contracts and the conflicts of interest that occur when a council member or a staff member has a financial interest in a contract which they are supervising or which they have authority to enter into. But there are other things in both the state ethics law and in the city ethics code which you need to be aware of. First, as Tina said, The ethics code of the city, which I believe is the latest version is 2015. That ethics code says that all city employees and all city officials, including board and commission members, are required to comply with the ethics code. And the penalty for failing to do so in complying with the ethics code is potentially being removed from your office as a commissioner. So it's something to be aware of. I know you've probably all read it, all signed it, and have submitted it to the clerk, so you're probably all familiar with it. I'll talk just briefly about some of the things that are on the ethics, in the ethics code. First, the ethics code prohibits conflicts of interest. And as I said, the state ethics code really looks at conflicts of interest in terms of contractual relationships. But the city's ethics code says essentially that you are not to take any action or commit any act which is inconsistent with your performance of your duties as a municipal official. And I think the way I look at it in terms of the conflict of interest there is, and particularly with respect to the role of the PPC, is if you are making legislative proposals or taking actions which would benefit you individually, specifically, as opposed to the public in general, that's the kind of conflict of interest that you're looking for, or that is of concern with respect to the Development Commission. And again, it has to be legislation that benefits you in a way that is different from the way it works to the public at large. So let's say, for example, I'll give the example. I don't know, I haven't thought of a good one for the Development Commission, but we all know that the City Council every year passes a tax levy. And you could say, well, their property is going to be taxed, so how much they pass in terms of the tax levy directly affects them. But it doesn't affect any council member more than any other member of the public. All members of the public are affected in the same way by it. So it's not a conflict of interest for the council to do that. But if the council were, for example, if a council member were to vote to vacate a street in front of that council member's house, and that would mean that the street right-of-way became owned by that council member, that would constitute a conflict of interest, because that would be something where they would directly benefit in a way that the other members of the public would not. There is also in the city's ethics code and also in the state ethics code a prohibition on receiving gifts and gratuities as a result of your service as a commissioner. And I think the idea of gifts and gratuities is maybe a little bit broader as well, and maybe this comes under the conflict of interest as well, but you can't receive discounts and things that are related to just your position as a commissioner. For example, it used to be that wireless companies would say, oh, well, you're a public official or you're a public employee, we'll give you the discount, the public employee discount. Well, that's fine if you're talking about your city cell phone, if you had a city cell phone, but it's not okay to get that discount on your personal cell phone, because you're getting that because of you being a commissioner, but it's not related to commission business. You also, more appropriately with respect to gifts and gratuities, if somebody wants to give you tickets to a ball game or tickets to an event, generally those kinds of things are things which, if they're not of a de minimis value, those are things that do create an issue for you. You're not supposed to accept gifts and gratuities. You can accept things on behalf of the city. So if somebody comes in and says, well, you guys are so great, we want to give you chocolates, and we want to give you give you this. You can accept those, but you need to make those are really gifts to the city. You don't want to just take those home personally. You want to offer them up to others. I can give an example that a few years ago, a municipality that I worked in and still do had their fire department offered Xboxes as a gift. Every member of the fire department or every member at this station should get an Xbox because, hey, they came and responded to the fire. And my response was, well, the individual firefighters cannot accept that as a gift. They can't take that Xbox and take it home. But if the person wanted to donate those to fire stations for people to use, or wanted to donate a television to a fire station for a firefighter to watch during those off hours when they're sleeping at the firehouse, that would be fine because that's a gift to the city. So there are exceptions to the gifts and gratuities provisions, but generally speaking, gifts and gratuities are not something that you should accept. There's also a prohibition in the city ethics code of engaging in political activity while doing your job. And for example, you can't wear campaign buttons and campaign materials while you're on the dais as a commissioner, because that is something where you are essentially campaigning and relying upon the fact that your meetings are televised or that the public is there in order to get that campaign message out. Recently, the state auditor has taken the position, and I think all cities are complying with it now, that you should not allow people during the public comment portion of your agenda to engage in political activity. The prohibition is on the use of public facilities or public equipment or public supplies to further the candidacy of any individual, or to further to oppose or support a ballot proposition. So as I said, the auditor has taken the position that if somebody comes up during the public comment portion of your agenda and wants to talk about a ballot issue, something that the city has put on the ballot in order to fund infrastructure, or wants to talk about the school levy or something like that, that's, if they're campaigning for or against that, that's not something that you should allow during your open public comment period.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. I think I just wanted to let you, Commissioner Vader had a question.
Sure.
Yeah. Hi. Sorry. Excuse me. I think I've somewhat fallen firmly into camp. Like, oh my goodness, what did I sign up for with all of this? But I had a question about the conflict of interest piece, and I heard you say that that really refers to like kind of personal benefit. But I'm curious if that also applies to like perceived bias. So for example, I live in Tallis, and if we're discussing something that's related to Tallis, could there be a perception of bias on my behalf? And does that constitute a conflict of interest?
I would say generally no. I mean, Tallis is a fairly big place, and whatever you decide with respect to Tallis is going to affect a fairly sizable portion of the community. So even though you have some personal interest in what happens up at Tallis, obviously, I don't think that necessarily constitutes a conflict of interest or a bias situation for you. So I think under those circumstances, the part of the reason that you get picked to be on a commission like this is because you're representing parts of the community that you live in, and so it's expected that you will bring some perspective to that. But as long as it doesn't benefit you personally more than anyone else in Tallis, I think you're fine. Just closing this subject, as Tina said, the Ethics Code reiterates the importance of complying with the Open Meetings Act and complying with the Public Records Act. And in both cases, as I said, if you fail to comply with those, the Ethics Code provides that in the case of city employees, they can be disciplined for failing to comply, but it also, with respect to commissioners, it provides that you may be removed from your position as a commissioner if you fail to comply with these acts. And again, I want to be mindful of what when Chair Fall said that I was scaring the heck out of you. I hope I'm not. These things are relatively easy to comply with. I think that in most cases, it's just common sense. I think there's one thing maybe in the ethics policy, or maybe it's in one of the memos that accompanies it, that just says, if it feels unethical, it probably is. And I think most of you will just rely on your feelings and be able to tell easily what parts of how the ethics code works and whether something is unethical or not. So I wouldn't be too worried about these penalties, but we're just telling you that that's what the code provides.
All right, I'll try to move through the next couple slides fairly quickly. Your role, and here are some of the categories or items that we'll be covering. So attendance, because it's about planning, it's about public noticing and the costs associated with public hearing notices, it's important that we understand whether or not you're going to have a quorum for your commission and when your alternate members can be filling those seats. So please let your staff liaison know when you have advanced travel. Please, we ask, at least as part of your rules and regulations, if you can, a minimum of 5-day notice is helpful. Obviously, there'll be some exceptions and things that come up. But again, if you haven't provided any advance notice, you will be listed as an unexcused on the minutes. And if you have 3 consecutive unexcused absences, that does jeopardize your place on the commission. It's also important that we understand who's going to be present, because we want the fullest extent of your board to be seated and to have voting rights. So we're not just looking to fill the minimum quorum, we're looking to fill all your seats at a meeting. So we look to 1 or more of your alternates be serving in that capacity. Alternates can certainly be part of your discussion, but when it gets time to vote or debate an item, that would be inappropriate unless they were serving in that formal regular member seat. You have some flexibility on how you decide who's going to do that. You could do something like first to arrive at the meeting. You could do something where maybe if an alternate was more informed on a topic, that might help provide that guidance. And then you could do some other things like share that role over time to make sure that it's equitable amongst the group. So I spoke earlier about sort of our requirements for getting information out, and part of that is obviously for the public to be informed, but so that you can too. So we want you to come prepared. We want you to set time aside so that you know what's on the agenda, that you've read the materials, and you understand what type of action, whether it be informing you, discussion that's expected of you, or if there's action. So there are some abbreviations that's noted on your agendas to help guide you through that. And then I believe Tisha did this great screenshot that just was one of your recent meetings. It goes through your order of business, sign codes. They were looking for some action from you. That gave you a bunch of material to digest. And again, coming prepared is probably the most effective way that you can serve your board. I'm going to move through these quickly, but I also am happy to come back and talk more about these if it's helpful. And you'll hear a sort of a reoccurring theme on these. So this is the section when you get ready to make motions and amendments and you start deliberating. So I'll just tell you that the main motion is, it's basically a proposal to do something. So it does require a second. It's helpful to have in writing. You might see a suggested motion in front of you in some of your materials. That can be modified if that is the motion that you'd like to make. And again, if it's seconded. A discussion really should be limited before you delve into the item, which is why we want motions on the floor to help facilitate that. And then there's an example of what a motion might sound like on the board. So in this case, someone on the commission might say, I'd like to make a motion. And then they say, I move that the commission recommend approval of the proposed amendments to parking requirements as presented in the findings of fact. Then that could be debated. Obviously, it need to be seconded. The chair would announce it. The chair would help facilitate discussion. And I should point out, we are having chair training June 22nd with our mayor and with the clerk's office. So we look forward to that, having the chair and vice chair there next month. Maker of the motion typically has the first opportunity to speak. Comments need to be germane to the motion. And we look for an equitable balance. So that could be things like, it could be helpful to have a round robin style. You might want to ensure that everyone's had an opportunity to speak before you go back and have secondary comments. You could also have time limits if that was appropriate. Really gets at the heart of sort of that back and forth dialogue isn't appropriate. It should be facilitated through the chair. And we are going to give the chair some tools to help do that in the future. Amendments. Amendments can be made to motions, although it needs to occur after the main motion has been made and seconded, but yet before the motion has actually been voted on. So it's helpful, again, to have amendments in writing. And since we're in the virtual world, it's helpful for someone to have placed that motion wording in chat or have on the screen. Debate at that time, though, once an amendment has been made and seconded, is limited really to the subject of that amendment. And then you could only go on making so many amendments to amendments. So really, you know, we hope you're not over motion making, that you can deal with one motion at a time or one amendment at a time, and then close out that amendment before you move on to another one. And then just some examples if someone wanted to have an amendment. In this case, it would be amending the recommendation to include some additional parking or bicycle parking spaces. Or there could be an amendment that asks the council to consider a parking study. And then you would have the opportunity to debate that and then to vote on it. And again, the chair has some obligations to restate the motions that are in front of you so that it's clear. And of course, if anyone is unsure whether they're voting, so if you're an alternate and it hasn't been made clear at the start of the meeting, you can ask for clarification about what your role is. You can also, if you're unclear about what's being voted on, you can ask, and someone should be able to restate the motion for you. Sometimes we hear folks say things like, I'd like to abstain from voting. We really don't have a clause for that. You're appointed to the commission to have an opinion and to help shape the work and make recommendations. So if you abstain at the time that the vote is called for, it'll be counted as a yes vote. Unless you have a true conflict of interest that was declared in advance, in those cases, you would actually depart the meeting or step away and return when that item was over. So in virtual meetings, we're doing a roll call vote. So that's a little different than in person. So you have a thoughtful way to hear each voice and then to announce the vote. That is also captured in your minutes. And then once the vote has been taken, that is the vote that, that is the action that by which the council or commission took, and business should go on.
Excuse me, Tina?
Yes.
I have one comment, and then Commissioner or Chair Fall has a question as well. But my comment is, obviously, you all know this, but motions are only made during the public hearings. And when we are doing a discussion item, you can discuss. But if there is direction that you all want to give staff, even during discussions, we want to make sure that it's a consensus, that staff's not going to be following direction based on one person's opinion. So we will still sort of be taking informal votes during discussions as well.
Yeah, and there might be times where you have an action item in front of you without it necessarily being a public hearing. So again, you just need to understand how formal is your vote versus consensus. And if any time that there's an objection to taking a consensus vote, you can go to roll call.
And thank you. And then Commissioner Fall, Chair Fall.
Thank you, Kristen. So I have a question for Tina and Kristen. In the past, this is based on the previous slide, when using chat, we've been advised not to use chat to make amendments or discuss anything except putting in the question,
Correct.
comment or question, because it's not viewable by the public.
Correct. We are simply saying, if it's helpful to have in writing, to be read, that's the only purpose. So at council meetings, I will prep the motion that I heard in chat or pull it from the agenda. And again, it's just so it can be read verbatim. If another council member has an amendment to make, they most likely will have filtered it to me. And again, I'll place it in chat so that it can be seen. I could also share my screen and have it in a Word document. The whole intent is that it's clear, it can be read, it can be reread verbally. It's not to discuss or debate it within chat. It's simply to state what the proposed motion is so that it can be read correctly.
Okay, because I think that might be very helpful to the commissioners, because sometimes we stumble with making amendments. And if we can communicate it in chat and read it verbatim, then everybody can see and understand what they're looking at, and we can make a decision on it in a public forum.
Right. And so long as it's being verbalized, it's okay to have that the verbatim language there.
Excellent. Thank you.
And yeah, and your point's great, which is you must feel free to pause, feel free to take a recess if it's unclear what an amendment is, so that it can be written down or verbalized or placed on the board. That's very important. And then, Kristen, you were talking about motions within public hearings. So I did want to talk about a slide with the public hearing process. So typically, you will have an item that's under the public hearing header, and before you open the hearing, you will want to hear a staff presentation. You'll be provided the commissioners an opportunity to ask some questions of what they're hearing. And then for the hearing portion, again, which is just the portion of the meeting, the chair would formally open that, and then public comments would be heard. It would go on until there were no more comments to be heard. And then the commission would need to decide at that time, have they heard enough, or do they want to keep hearing from the community at a later date? So they have the opportunity to either close the hearing or continue it. And that needs to be decided before you continue deliberations. It is important, you can have a little bit of deliberations, but again, you don't want to have, it needs to be very limited, which is why motions are very important. They serve a purpose, they serve a second. That gives you an opportunity to debate and dialogue what that outcome may be, and then ultimately to vote. And And then unless there's questions at this time, I'll let Mr. Haney take over the remaining, and just give me a cue when you want me to move your slides ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to cover public hearings and legislative decisions. The first thing I want to do is to draw a distinction. There are two types of public hearings. There are legislative public hearings and there are quasi-judicial public hearings. In a legislative public hearing, the object is to obtain public input on legislative policy matters. For example, if you are considering amendments to the city's comprehensive plan, if you are considering amendments to the city's land use regulations, if you are considering adopting a plan like the transportation master plan or the CIP, or if you are considering rezones that require a comprehensive plan amendment in order to be processed, those types of things are legislative hearings. They are matters in which you are making a policy decision as to what the city's policies should be moving forward. Contrast that with quasi-judicial hearings. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the object is to decide the legal rights of specifically identified parties. Most of the things that the PPC does are legislative hearings. The only thing that I can think of that would be a quasi-judicial hearing would be something where you're holding a hearing on a rezone that does not require a comprehensive plan amendment. I believe that's a type A rezone under the city's code. That would be a quasi-judicial matter because you are deciding the rights of the specific property owner in the proceedings. So those are the two types of hearings that you will see. I'm going to talk tonight about the legislative hearing because that's the one that you get most often. And in a legislative hearing, you're acting like a legislature. You're here to make a decision based on policy that is going to affect the decision of, or the community as a whole, and how the public generally will conduct themselves. You are acting just like a congressperson or a state legislator. You are making a decision based on a law. Legislative hearings do require notice and a reasonable opportunity to be heard. The amount of notice depends upon your specific code and the specific type of hearing that it is. Your staff will be responsible for preparing the notice and making sure that it gets done in time. Every once in a while, there may be a problem with notice, but for the most part, notice gets done very well and easily in Issaquah, and its intent is to make sure that people have an adequate and reasonable opportunity to be heard. And that's both given to them by giving them notice far enough in advance so that they can become familiar with an issue and be able to give you good public comment on the issue, and also by providing a notice which advises them specifically enough about what you are going to do that they have the ability to comment intelligently. And with respect to that, I would say, for example, if you cannot have a notice that simply says the Planning Policy Commission is going to meet or hold a public hearing on such and such a night to consider amendments to the comprehensive plan. That doesn't tell anybody enough so that they know that they can be prepared. If there is a notice that says the Planning Policy Commission is going to hear amendments to the comprehensive plan that relate specifically to the capital facilities program, and if you want more information, you can obtain the capital facilities program through this link, that's enough of a notice to provide people. But you need to be specific enough in the notice to tell people what you're going to be talking about so that they can understand what will and won't be discussed. Next slide, Tina. With respect to the opportunity to be heard, At a legislative public hearing, all members of the public must be allowed to speak. This is different from a quasi-judicial hearing where only people who are interested in the proceedings get a chance to speak. For example, in like a rezone, you would allow the applicant for the rezone to speak. You would allow neighbors who received notice to speak and so forth, but you wouldn't necessarily have every member of the public be allowed to speak on some quasi-digital matters. But at a legislative public hearing, the floor is open for anybody to speak about this, and you must allow them to speak. You can establish reasonable rules such as relevance, time limit, and decorum. Relevance, for example, speaking to the issues ahead in front of you and not coming up and talking about irrelevant things, which the chair would be able to gavel a person down for doing. You can set time limits. Many jurisdictions set time limits on people at public hearings. They may be anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes per speaker, with an idea that you can allow more time if the issues are particularly complex. With respect to decorum, that's been one that's been fairly interesting in the courts of late as to when you can tell people that when people are out of order, and the courts have said that merely finding a person's speech offensive in some way is not enough to declare them out of order. They must actually be disrupting the meeting in order for you to do that. So, but you can establish reasonable rules for the conduct of the hearing. It is important that the chair set expectations at the outset of the hearing and state what the rules are going to be. If, for example, you're going to have a rule that we're only going to allow people to have 5 minutes to speak tonight because we have 100 people here, you should make that clear at the meeting so that people can gear their presentations to the rules that you've stated. Next slide, Tina. With respect to legislative hearings, the decision criteria are set out by code or by statute. And in the city of Issaquah, the zoning code has specific criteria in a lot of situations which you are to take into account in making your decision. And I know staff provides you with a staff report that helps you with those criteria, saying how the staff views those criteria and what they are recommending based on those. And you need to make your decisions when you have criteria in the code using those criteria. Sometimes there are not set criteria in the code. In the absence of set criteria, it's a pure policy judgment in a legislative hearing. Many times you are just being asked as a matter of policy to look at a particular issue and try to decide what is best for the community. And you're the best judges of that, and there's no way to set out criteria for that kind of decision. So the code will be silent on that a lot of time. In a legislative hearing, you are not limited to considering the testimony and documents presented at the hearing. It's legislative, and that means you can take into account anything and everything. And that's why you've been appointed to the commission, is to take into account your background, your experience, and to reach a judgment relating as to a policy matter as to what's best for the community. So you're not limited to considering just what people have told you or the documents presented in the hearing. And you'll be able to take into account comments that are made by the public during public comment periods. You'll be able to take in your own expertise and experience, and you can bring all of that to bear in a legislative hearing. That's in contrast to quasi-judicial hearings where you are acting like a judge, and therefore you must decide the matter based on the criteria in the code and based on the evidence you've received during the trial or the quasi-judicial hearing. And so in a quasi-judicial hearing, you're much more restricted as to what you're able to take into account. But in a legislative hearing, you have a lot of flexibility. Next slide, Tina. Now, I wouldn't be a lawyer if I didn't tell you what the legal challenges are that people can bring to actions. And you're making a recommendation to the city council, you're holding a public hearing, you're making a recommendation on legislative matters, and the council makes the ultimate final decision. For comprehensive plan amendments and for all your development regulations, those regulations and amendments need to comply with the Growth Management Act. And I'm sure you're all aware that the Growth Management Act was enacted back in 1990. It set a series of policy goals and specific requirements for comprehensive planning and for land use regulations in cities. And all of your comprehensive plan amendments and development regulations must comply with the GMA. Your comprehensive plan regulations, in addition, have to comply with the King County countywide planning policies, which are a set of policies which are adopted by King County with the input of all of the cities in King County in order to guide the development of comp plans to make sure that they are consistent throughout and coordinated throughout the county. With your development regulations, not only do you have to comply with the GMA, but you have to comply with your own comprehensive plan. And one of the criteria in the code is whether or not the regulation actually complies with the comprehensive plan and furthers the comprehensive plan policies. With respect to the GMA challenges, what happens once the council makes a decision on a comprehensive plan amendment or makes a decision on a land use regulation that you've recommended is that the next step is that someone can challenge that to the Growth Management Hearings Board. There is now a Growth Management Hearings Board which has panels in a couple of different areas in the state. There's the Central Puget Sound Growth Management Hearings Board, there's the Western Washington Growth Management Hearings Board, and there's the Eastern Washington Growth Management Hearings Board. We are, of course, in the Central Puget Sound Board, and challenges to city regulations go to the Growth Management Hearings Board for decision. Those challenges are based on the record that is made before the city. So every piece of paper that the city considers in enacting the regulation or enacting the comprehensive plan is part of the record, including the testimony given at public hearings, and the Growth Board reviews that upon request and looks at whether or not your regulations meet the requirements of the Growth Management Act. Your regulations are presumed valid on adoption, but they can be overturned by the Growth Board if they are non-compliant with the GMA. Next slide. Another legal challenge that comes up with respect to land use regulations is procedural due process. Regulations get overturned because procedures were not followed in the code. Generally speaking, the Growth Board has said that it doesn't really have authority to deal with whether a city follows its own code procedures, but courts do. And when the Growth Board makes a decision, the next step after the Growth Board's decision is that a person can appeal that decision to the courts. And that's where these procedural due process considerations come in, and where regulations can be invalidated with respect to them. And again, it goes back to parties have to have an adequate notice and a meaningful opportunity to be heard. And if you're not providing adequate notice, or you didn't provide a meaningful opportunity for public input, that can be a due process issue. Next, Tina. There's also substantive due process, and substantive due process looks at the substance of the regulation and considers whether that regulation is justified. It used to be up until 2020 that the courts in Washington had like a three-factor test that they would look at in order to determine whether a regulation have violated substantive due process. But they've simplified the test with a case called Yim versus City of Seattle. They simplified the test. And now the test for due process is simply that the legislation has to serve a legitimate public purpose and must not be arbitrary or irrational. So as you make your decisions on legislation and make your recommendations, you should always be asking yourself, what is the legitimate public purpose here that we are trying to serve? What is the issue we're trying to get at? And is that really a public issue? And then assuming that you determine that it is, then how does the regulation further that purpose? And it has to be in such a manner that is not arbitrary or irrational. So that's what you look at when you're looking at a substantive due process issue with respect to regulations. Next slide, Tina. I think that completes my presentation on the legal challenges. I think Tina and I have completed our presentation as a whole, and if you have additional questions, we're happy to answer them at this point.
And we're, of course, happy to return as needed. And we've got a chair training June 22nd.
And I would also say that I know Tina and I are both available. If you have a question that's coming up on a matter, something's coming up on your agenda and you wonder, gee, do I have a conflict of interest? Gee, is the notice adequate for this proceeding? And so we're always available to answer those questions. And we like to know about those things, so that we can give you the best advice and you can have a good public hearing. And hopefully we can work through issues so that that your proceedings are valid and that we don't have any legal challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haney. Thank you, Ms. Eggers. I'd like to do a quick recap, unless any of the commissioners have questions. I want to recap some of the questions that come up just to make sure that the commissioners are satisfied with the answers that they've got. Nina had a question about the minimum time required for special meeting. Nina, did they answer your questions sufficiently, or do you still have questions about that? Hello, Nina?
Okay, I'll put my mic on. Commissioner Milligan here. Yes, thank you. I heard the answer to the question that the Washington State legal minimum of 24 hours applies to special meetings, but that the city endeavors to give us much more notice than that. And I commented that indeed they do.
Excellent. Okay. And Commissioner Matt Monahan, you had a question about personal email being searchable in a public request, a public records request. Were they able to answer your question sufficiently?
They did. Thank you.
Excellent. And Sarah Bader had a question about conflict of interest because she lives in a specific community when that specific community is a discussed topic. Sarah, did you have any additional questions about that, or you're satisfied with the answers?
Yep, no additional questions. All good.
Excellent. All right. So with that, I think we will move on to Gary Schmidt with the discussion about stormwater.
Good evening, commissioners. Very pleased to be here. Name is Gary Schmidt, and I am the relatively new, about 3 months, utilities engineer manager here at the city. So let me share my screen and jump into the formal presentation. Okay.
And I did mean to obliterate your last name.
Everybody see my screen okay?
We can see your screen. Thank you, Gary.
Perfect. All right. Again, so my name is Gary Schmidt. And while I've only worked here about 90 days. I have been in the water resource business, an environmental engineering field for about 3 decades. Prior to joining Team Qua, I served as utilities manager for the city of Redmond for about 6 years, and then as a senior drainage and wastewater manager with Seattle Public Utilities for about 13 years. Let's move on to tonight's agenda, meeting purpose. So purpose tonight, my colleague Alan Quinn and I will provide an overview of the Storm and Surface Water Master Plan development and seek your feedback in general on the presentation and in relation to a few specific questions, which we'll come back to in a minute. This is the kind of overall agenda here. We'll be talking about that specific direction. We'll give a little Stormwater 101. I placed that into this presentation after a good discussion with the Environmental Board, where I didn't have that, and had a few suggestions to incorporate that to provide additional context. So we'll be adding that in today. And then the rest of the presentation will really be about the development of the plan and where we're headed. In terms of the direction needed, just to start us off, and again, we'll come back to this at the end and have more time and more context for each of the questions. But to go over them quickly, first, what are your thoughts on our criteria to prioritize both issues and solutions? And again, we'll share that list on screen. How aggressive should we be in addressing climate change with the plan? And we'll talk about 4 potential options for us to explore. Also be asking you if we should look and consider to develop a policy directive to guide funding across our programs, which are the 3 are flooding and conveyance, water quality and habitat. And then finally, just general thoughts that you have on what are some of the most important stormwater issues right now as we start this plan, and then hopefully we'll check back with you as we come back with future touches, see if that may have changed. So before we jump into the plan, I'd like to provide a little context in relation to stormwater runoff, stormwater pollution, and potential solutions to both. Let me first start by saying something fairly obvious, but at the same time, it seems to me is the cornerstone for this conversation. As we moved here in Issaquah from forested to rural and then urban land use, and not just here in Issaquah, but in the region and the country, of course, there have been unequivocal, unanticipated negative consequences related to stormwater. Now, this graphic illustrates on the left side of the screen, only a small portion of rainfall converts to stormwater under forested condition. In fact, about 90% of rainfall under these forested conditions either infiltrates into the ground or is utilized or processed in some way by trees, shrubs, and plants. And then we're left with about 10% of runoff. Now, if you go and look at the right side of the figure here, the percentages change drastically as we get into more of a built-out landscape, whereas the runoff increases from about 10 to 55% on any given parcel. So really, what happens without any protective measures as we move from the forested to the urban, there's an increase in runoff, and this then has a direct effect on peak flows, higher peak flows, which result in flooding, increased bank erosion and channel scour, which thereby increases sediment loading into the streams and into Lake Sammamish. And finally, increased pollution loading, because runoff collects and conveys chemicals and debris in our stormwater system and into our water bodies. Now, these physical changes that occur have direct impacts not only on humans but on our treasured aquatic species. And even in my limited tenure with the city here, keenly aware of serious impacts to residential homes and businesses due to flooding, aware of beach closures in the greater Seattle area on and off again due to high pollutant concentrations. And then, of course, most of us are aware of deeply declining fish populations, not only in our region, but in our own Issaquah watersheds due to many factors, including the flooding, water quality declines, lack of habitat, and lack of food sources. So let's focus a little bit on quality before we turn the table to something a little more positive and solutions. So this graph attempts to tell a real simple story. There are many possible sources of pollution in our urban environment. Some of the most common pollutants here that are shown on the graphic, street and automobile runoff, including antifreeze, oil, and then tire and brake pad lining residue, industrial runoff, agricultural runoff, including pesticides and fertilizers, pet waste, and leaky septic systems. Now, the good part of this bad news is that the loading of many of these pollutants into the environment and into our water bodies may be significantly reduced by changing basic day-to-day practices here in the city, at businesses, and at our home. And the same really good news holds true for runoff volumes and peak flows. So on that note, let's look at some general solutions, talk about some general solutions before we move into the plan. So for context, as a society, we began to really understand the potential stormwater-related impacts for moving to this forested to urban landscape in the 60s. The National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, that's a mouthful, it's also known as NPDES. That permit program began to address water pollution by regulating sources that discharge pollutants to waters of the U.S. This was created in 1972 by the Clean Water Act, and the NPDES permit program is authorized to state governments by EPA to perform any permitting, administrative, and enforcement aspects. Now, much time has elapsed and many lessons have been learned since 1972. The existing minimum control measures in the permit right now, or you could think about these are categories of solutions or categories of actions or regulations, include stormwater planning, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about tonight, master plan, public education and outreach, public involvement and participation, storm system mapping, illicit discharge detection and elimination, controlling runoff from new development, redevelopment, and construction sites, operation and maintenance best practices, and then source control programs for existing development. So trying to stop pollution at its source. So those are kind of the key categories where we're required to act as a city, at least at some minimum level. Now, as you can see here, some of the actions we can, for example, take at home to do our part, cover piles of dirt, mulch, yard waste, and other debris. So when it does rain, they stay put. Check vehicles for leaks. You do it yourself or take it into a shop. Cover trash containers and clean up pest waste as examples. And then have your septic systems professionally inspected and cleaned. So we all can do our part here, and these really are source control, right? So it's a lot easier and cost effective to stop the pollution from entering than to try to clean it up once it's in. Now we'll head into the description of our storm and surface water master plan. And what I wanted to start with was the desired outcomes. Another way to look at this is really our scope of work or our deliverables, or what really the ratepayers are buying by having this plan created. So first here is we'll be developing a roadmap or a living document that will help us as a city reduce flooding and improve water quality and habitat across the city that we will be committing to review and update on a regular basis. So this living document is the plan itself. We also want to deliver clear and concise policy direction in that plan, and that's why we're speaking to you tonight, so that we can build projects and programs under that policy umbrella. So in other words, when you see a project being constructed in the area and it has to do with stormwater, you should be able to point back to the policy that helped create or start that project. At least that's my intent. Also establish goals and performance targets that we can track and report on over time. Have a list of priority actions, and not only capital projects, but operating programs, maintenance activities, and policy development to reduce flooding and improve water quality and habitat. I mentioned NPDES before, and part of this plan is to comply with that permit. Now, we are also going above and beyond the permit requirement thanks to a grant we received from DOE, Department of Ecology, that has helped us, the funding has helped us, not only do one basin, which is the requirement, but we're looking at all of the basins in Issaquah. So I'm really excited about that we have a chance to do this here. And of course, final point here, which is maybe obvious, but I do want to mention it, that this plan must be aligned with the city comprehensive plan and the strategic plan. I mean, that's a success to have that occur. So also thought it would be helpful, given who all of you are here in the planning policy realm, to provide just a brief summary of the plans, codes, guidelines that may influence our work or may be influenced by our work. So I've broken these down into two categories, city and then regional and federal. So let me just highlight a couple in each. So in the city, of course, we've just talked about the comp plan and the strategic plan. There's also the Climate and Sustainability Action Plan that my colleague Megan is leading, a host of plans from our friends at Parks, and then mobility and utility master plans. Now, in the regional context, I just want to focus on two here that are really going to be important over the next couple of years for us. It's the Washington State Department of Transportation Culvert Replacement Program. There's going to be a number of culverts replaced by WashDOT along I-90 that we'll be working with them on. And then the FEMA Flood Insurance Program. They're always a great partner to have. And then my final slide here before handing off to my colleague Alan, this be a little discussion of our basic schedule here. And I wanted to first highlight that this had started in 2019, but then a big slowdown as we talked about 2020, right, and COVID. So we're really ramping back up. But the work that has been completed since 2019, you can see, is really called out under basin characterization. And this includes identification of city flooding, water quality, and habitat issues that Alan's going to talk about more, and also compiling our physical data, such as water quality and flow, that we have in our existing plans and database. And our consultant OTAC and Alan have been the driving force in that basin characterization. What lies ahead, after this overview today, and we'll be returning to you at least a couple times, are development of policy directives, again, that are consistent with strategic and comprehensive plans, and then long-term goals and performance measure, again, and then finally the actions. And I look at this as almost a level of sight. Again, this is my example of when you see a new project or a new program, you should be able to, with this document, look at it and go and point back to the goal that it represents, and then point back to the policy directives. So that, as Jim kind of mentioned, that there is, in his talk, that there's logic here, right? The project doesn't appear out of nowhere. There's a reason for it, going back to the policy. So that's really what we want to create. And just to let you know too, besides coming to you and staying in tune with you for the rest of this year, we're also working with the Environmental Board, Parks Board, the Economic Vitality Commission, and then of course City Council. And then, as you can see here, we're hoping to wrap things up in first quarter of 22 with the adoption of the plan. I am going to hand it over to Alan to take us a little bit into the work that has been done to date.
Thanks, Gary. Good evening, commission members. My name is Alan Quinn, Senior Stormwater Engineer for the City of Issaquah. I've been working for the city for about 2.5 years. And prior to that, I was working down in California for a city government down there. And then prior to that, the city of Renton for 17 years. So I've about 27 years in stormwater management is my area of expertise. So tonight, as Gary said, we're going through a significant portion of at least the initial stages of the Storm and Surface Water Master Plan development. And just want to highlight on this slide the fact that we have done extensive stakeholder engagement. We realized that was a significant part of what we wanted to do to make sure we have a broad group of people participating and receiving input. Essentially 3 groups, I call them 3 different groups that we reached out to. First is the council and boards and commissions, and this is a 4th presentation we've given so far. And then the second group would be on the internal and external stakeholders, internal being city departments, and then external stakeholders would be outside agencies, state agencies and the county agencies, et cetera. And then lastly, we did outreach with the community. So those are the 3 broad categories. Our first stakeholder meeting was held in 2019, December 2019. And that was basically the kickoff meeting for the Storm and Surface Water Master Plan. That meeting included city operations, parks and community planning development departments. And then external stakeholders included Washington State Department of Transportation, Department of Ecology, as well as nonprofit organizations, Mountain Sounds Greenway Trust and Trout Unlimited. And we also invited Snoqualmie tribe, Indian tribe. So we had quite a diverse background of folks there. In that meeting, we basically gave a background of the purpose of the plan and also allowed stakeholders to provide input as to where they were seeing issues within the city regarding stormwater. And this is in terms of stormwater flow, water quality issues, as well as habitat issues. We then conducted a community outreach phase, which we, instead of having a meeting, we ended up doing a survey, online survey with a mapping tool, which worked out very well. It was a way for the community to go online, answer 2 basic questions, survey questions. The first is, where have they seen flooding in their community? And second was, have they noticed any long-term changes in water flow in the creeks and water quality within our creeks? We had 74 respondents, which is considered, I think, fairly significant number, and they all provided comments. And then there's a mapping tool which allowed respondents to actually physically locate where they were seeing issues, so we could get this mapped, and that information we used for the next phase, which was developing our characterization reports. We then did a city council touch in February 2020, which really was just a briefing memo and summarizing the Storm and Surface Water Master Plan and giving them an update as to where we were at that stage. The information that we collected from the various meetings and surveys we used to develop what's called a basin characterization study, which is sort of the initial assessment of the initial conditions of the basins. And when I say basins, they're watersheds. I'm basically defining those as areas within the city that all discharge to Lake Sammamish, and which are the receiving waters. So all the major creeks within the city: Issaquah Creek, Tibbetts Creek, Laughing Jacobs Creek, Lewis Creek, Snyder Creek, Park Hill Creek. So all those are considered, receiving waters, and everything that drains to those receiving waters all end up in Lake Sammamish, which is the downstream water body. So that's sort of how to sort of give you a context of what I'm talking about here. So we did this characterization study included a fair amount of data collection and literature review of existing plans, studies, drainage reports, basin plans. We also compiled known issues. As I mentioned, we compiled information from not only community, but for our different departments within the city, operations, and they have a long list of issues that they have concerns with. We're able to get all that on these characterization reports, and as well as a hydraulic model, which we updated for Issaquah Creek to come up with revised flows within Issaquah Creek. And we also analyzed, did some analysis of existing water quality monitoring data. The city does do water quality monitoring, stormwater water quality monitoring of base flow as well as storm flow. We have 10 years worth of data that needed to be analyzed in terms of looking at trends. And then we also looked at the influences on the built environment on the receiving waters, and that would be how land use impacts stormwater quality and flow. Next slide. And then this is a summary of what we compiled through the combination of surveys, online survey, as well as from meeting with the different departments and agencies that provided input. And as you can see, we looked at 5 main categories: flow issues, so that's flooding, basically flooding, water quality, habitat, erosion, and then maintenance issues. So in Issaquah Creek, just as you can see, there is the most significant basin within the city. It's the largest basin, and not surprisingly, we have the largest number of issues. So anyhow, it's just a good summary of what we've found so far in our initial conditions. So I want you to look at these 4 questions, and I'll just go through them quickly. So what are your thoughts on our criteria to prioritize issues and solutions, which we'll go through in a bit? How aggressive should we be in addressing climate change with this plan? And should we develop a policy directive to guide funding across all our programs? And what stormwater issues are most important to you right now? And so you are another group that we want to make sure we include in this update, and we want to have everybody provide input, so no one's left out. This is a list of some of the metrics we're going to use to prioritize, can't say that, projects to address the known issues within each basin. So first one is effectiveness. So obviously, how well is it going to deal with the issue that we're trying to address, whether it's flooding, water quality impairments, land ownership. So this would be, is it private or publicly held lands? And that is a consideration when prioritizing projects. Constructability, how difficult is it to construct? Are there a lot of utility conflicts? So those are things to consider. Permitting is a big part of projects, particularly habitat restoration projects. And so it's another consideration. Cost and funding opportunities and timing, coordination and partnership. So where can we leverage other agencies and to work together to collaboratively to do a project? In fact, this is has actually come up with WashDOT, Washington State Department of Transportation, where as Gary mentioned earlier, they're doing several culvert crossings along I-90. Lewis Creek is the first one they're going to be replacing. It's a huge project, $50 million project, and we're looking at doing possibly doing some work in conjunction with what they're doing, since they're going to be tearing up the roadway, and we're looking at doing some improvements as well. So that's a good opportunity for that. Regulatory requirements and environmental social justice. We will make sure that we do projects and prioritize them based on where there's communities that maybe don't always get the attention they need. So we want to make sure we're equitably distributing projects within the city. And lastly, how are these projects going to benefit, as I said, the downstream water body, which is Lake Sammamish? Next slide. Is that it?
Yes. Chair Faulds, would you like us to pause here and take questions or comments, or would you rather have us run through the 4 and then just open it up in general? Either way is fine for us.
I know that there will be questions. I'd like to hold off and continue through the slides, and then we'll address questions at the end.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alan, for that. And I'll take over on the next 3 questions here. So a little bit of context here for climate change. Now, latest predictions, and again, we're going to be really focusing on climate change related to stormwater, specifically precipitation. I know again, I mentioned my colleague Megan is going to be working on the climate action plan. The stormwater piece will definitely be part of that, but there's much more to discuss in climate change, but just wanted to give that precursor. The latest predictions include really a likelihood of shorter duration, high intensity events, right? So more thunderstorms. I'm from the Midwest, Wisconsin, and I do miss my thunderstorms, but it's a hazard when it happens here because we designed our systems for a trickle, not a downpour. So if that prediction comes true, and there's some statistically validity that it already is shifting, that could be a very big issue. Another thing that was also predicted is winters to be warmer and wetter, and summers warm and drier. So those we talked a little bit about this before, but some of the potential impacts, the very tangible, fungible impacts would be higher peak flows, again, this greater erosive forces, and decreased water quality due to that greater sediment input. Of course, there's also potential changes to temperature pattern, which might affect riparian and wetland flora and fauna, and thus stormwater quality as well. So this master plan would like to address climate change in some way. Just even at the lowest bar, which we'll start with, which is the no action, would just be to discuss what the predictions are, but maybe not moving forward with any policy directives, because we would wait until the predictions are a little more solid, or until others have developed strategies and defined actions. Now, a next level approach could be, what we're just calling it the minimal proactive approach, is potentially changing our design standards for new projects so that they would take into account those larger events that may be occurring. Going a little bit further, we could also apply those standards to retrofits of existing facilities. We could also estimate what a 100-year flood, a very large flood in Issaquah Creek, might look like under those conditions, and just show that for illustrative purposes to people get a sense for what might happen. And we also could use more real-time control of our stormwater facilities to optimize management of that. And then finally, the most aggressive here would be working with the UW or another research institute. There's a number that we could work with to develop very specific precipitation data, forecast data for Issaquah, and we could regulate the floodplain based on that. Now, again, that's way above and beyond what FEMA does, but that is an option that others have talked about doing. So those would be the four we'd just like to get your feedback on. Third piece here, so funding balance. And let me say that we don't currently have a formal guidance on our storm programs. Now, again, the three main programs we've been talking all night are conveyance and flood control, water quality, and habitat. Those are the three areas there. Like I said, city doesn't currently have a policy, but a couple of agencies I've worked with before did have some guideposts for this, how on a six-year budget cycle, how we generally wanted to spend the dollars. And again, it wasn't necessarily hard and fast, and we weren't having to report on that to council, but we had what I showed here as a starting point: 50% for flood and conveyance, 25% for water quality, 25% for habitat. Now, the important thing to note, especially for Issaquah, because we are, I've learned very quickly, excellent at getting grants for utilities, and hope I keep up that tradition. It's going to be hard to keep up the pace, but I think we can do it. This doesn't include grants, so this would be for the dollars from our ratepayers only. So, and that typically, because we are able to get more grants for the habitat and water quality, rather than what some might consider the core work, which is flood reduction. So those are sometimes harder to get, harder to compete for. But we'll just like your feedback on does it sound like something we should explore more, or just not something we want to do here in Issaquah. And then, oops, the final one, I didn't make a slide for the final one, but I'll go back to that slide. That's really just your general thoughts and of what issues are important to you right now. And it could be a very specific one you have or a general concern across the city. Anything's fine. As Alan said, we're really just looking for your feedback so we can add that to our list of information that we've already gotten from stakeholders already. So Chair Fall, I'll pass that back to you to run the Q&A, and we'll be happy to discuss anything you'd like to talk about.
Excellent. Thank you. That was a great presentation there. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up to questions. But before we start, question to Kristen. Do we want to open this up for public comment before we dive into questions?
No, this is Kristen. No, we do have an opportunity for public comment after this presentation, and that can happen then.
Okay, excellent. So we'll go ahead and open it up for questions.
Commissioner Milligan has a question.
I guess Ron is saying, Chair Fall is saying it's okay for me to go. Sorry, I don't mean to be quick on the draw, just waiting for other people, and I don't want this opportunity to go. Thank you for this presentation, and I'm really glad to meet both of you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Milligan here. My question is, at this time, is general in nature, and it goes back to the first slide that was put up about the causes of increased issues with stormwater runoff. And as we look at our Central Issaquah plan, which was put into place after our, if I'm understanding correctly, after our stormwater plan, the Central Issaquah plan being 2012 and the City Stormwater Management Plan 2002 and these other plans in 2006, how could what we're working on right now inform the comprehensive plan, or maybe specifically the Central Issaquah plan, in regards to, oh shoot, we didn't mean to have so much impervious surface, for instance? Can it interact that way with our other plans?
Yeah, let me take a crack at that, and Alan, if you want to join in. This is discussion, and thank you, Commissioner. That Kristen and myself and other managers here at the city have been talking about. We're really hoping with the first part of what I would call the policy work here, we're looking at our existing policies and seeing, are those still relevant or not, and do we want to add some? And that's what we're going to be coming back with you and other boards next time. The idea would be that the policies created here would then potentially move over or be referenced in the comp plan update when it gets to utilities or the environment. So we're, like I said, there's a group of about 12 of us internally, a core team, and that's a big discussion we're having here is like, if we tweak some existing policies or add some new ones that you all and City Council approve that, where do they live? How do we reference them? So that's definitely part of this work. And I just be clear that it's also as being the newbie here, I scrubbed the comp plan and shoreline master plan for all the existing policies, and I didn't find them all at first, and then Kristen and others helped me, and so I feel fairly good about that now. And there's a lot of good stuff in there, but there's some things there that I'd like to potentially offer to change a little wording here or there sometimes, or sometimes dramatically. So that's what we're really hoping to get into with you next time. That we visit. You're welcome.
Commissioner Lewis has a question.
Thank you, Commissioner Joy Lewis. Thank you to Gary and Alan for the presentation. It was super helpful to start this discussion off. A couple of questions. One I had was about baseline data collection. You had a really good slide that talked about kind of all the different things you guys have been doing, looking at our different watersheds. And I'm curious if a list of actions has actually already been created based on the work that's been done. It was mentioned that has kind of been in process, paused, restarted. We often, from where we sit at our commission, are often used to seeing a map. And that map usually has things, an example might be the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Plan. think we're used to seeing kind of, where are these areas, right? And we may be grading those areas on a scale, city likes to usually do like a color scale, for instance, of kind of urgency. Is there one in place right now? Is it being created to be able to kind of look at our community as a whole and to see where we can choose to kind of put our action plan in place?
Alan,
Sure. Here, I'll take that one.
Yep.
Yeah. So the basin characterization reports I referred to earlier, those are they're in draft form, but they're substantially complete, and there's a huge amount of information in those reports that went into those reports. Right now, they're being reviewed by ecology, and so they're still in draft form. And then we're addressing their comment. We've addressed their comments, waiting for them the second set of comments that we've gotten from them. But yeah, basically those reports have a nice maps that were prepared showing all the issues, both flow issues, habitat issues, water quality issues, and their locations where all the problems have been located, as well as a table of describing the issues. And then and we've started the process of developing a suite of solutions, either projects or policy, programmatic options. And that's really the next phase, is to start to develop those solutions and then begin the prioritization process. And as Gary mentioned, we have a grant to do this work, to do part of the work, which is really the grant. All it says is that, well, we're meeting a permit, NPDES permit requirement, and that we have to develop a watershed scale master plan, which really just looks at the whole city in its entirety, looks at all the basins, and then prioritizes. We pick one basin, you prioritize that, and then develop projects to address solutions for that basin. We're going way beyond that, and we're looking at all of our basins equally, all the problems, and looking at comprehensive solutions to everything. So you're going above and beyond. But yes, those characterization reports, I think, do exactly what you're talking about. And I think something we can certainly consider sharing, as Gary and I have talked about. So yeah, so that's really the next phase, is to develop all the a list of projects, policies, prioritize those policies, and then that will go then to form the final plan, essentially. So
that would be fantastic. We love going over data, and it's been, I want to say, about 3.5 years that we've been bugging staff for this stormwater
right.
master plan.
Well, so and the other thing that we did, yeah. So we went a little, and in addition, we also, there's something that's called the State of Our Waters report. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that document that was prepared a while back. It was basically 10 years worth of data going back to early 1990s. And so 98 to, I think, yeah, anyhow, this also is updating that state of the waters. And so there's a whole section in each of these basin reports that discusses all the monitoring that's been done, and looking at all the water quality constituents that we're sampling for, and then looking at the trends, where exceedances, where contaminants have exceeded the state standards. So it's really a lot of good information. So yes, highly recommend that people read it.
That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Commissioner, may I add one thing, Commissioner?
Please.
I think I have the table of identified issues on the screen. Can you all see that?
Yes.
So what I just like to add, and Alan, everything you said was fantastic. And my vision here, and I think Alan and I are on the same page, is that, first screen here is, are these issues real? Are they still issues, right? We just got to make sure, because, maybe somebody thought there was one, but it's solved and whatever. So that's kind of screen one. Then screen two is really looking at each one of these independently and saying, hey, okay, what are possible solutions here? Could be a capital project, it could be an operating program, it could be a policy, right? So really, and then I think what you're getting at, Commissioner, too, then we apply that criteria, and then come back to you, and we have conversations and do back and forth, and we're going to end up with a list of priority actions, right? I don't know, 10, 15, whatever they may be. The cool part about this plan then will be all that information will still be in here, and when we have more resources, we can then go back to those projects those issues, I should say, right? Those issues that weren't addressed, and address them in the future, and we're not starting over, right? We'll already have a possible suite of solutions to come back to, so we don't have to restart again. So I think that's the beauty of doing this to a fairly detailed level across the whole city, is that this this really gets into why I called it a living document, because this is not going to sit on the shelf. This is going to be used constantly. My mind. So
that's fantastic. I love hearing that. My last question is kind of a little bit more abstract about stormwater capture for treatment. Tell me, like, high side, like, what is the best we could possibly do, right? Like, I imagine that there's an equation that goes into how much impervious surface we have, how much land area that you guys are doing on an engineering level that's far above our pay grade here in this commission, right? And you come back, I'm curious to know kind of basically what is the maximum amount of capture that we're able to do for treating our stormwater runoff?
You want to take that, Gary, or you can start first, and I
yeah,
can
yeah, no. So capture and treatment, right? It's you know, to answer at a high level, you know, what you have to look at is, you know, what is the area upstream of where you're trying to control that, right? And then it really is a function of, you know, what is that land use area there, right? How fast is it coming off? So you get a volume and a timing. And what you're basically doing is designing as much as you can, right? Given the space you have. But there's certain, what I'd say is if we're trying to capture and treat an area from a new development, there are requirements for that, right? There are requirements that have to be met. And Alan, you probably know better than that. But so that'd be one. So it's fairly easy answer for a project. There are standards that have to be met. But I took your question a little bigger, like we're really trying to treat a whole area, multiple projects, a region. Yeah, then it gets down to how much space do we have, right? Available space. Just in the last city I was at, Redmond, you know, we did a really good job of stormwater control there, but we're running out of land of places to build. We need some very big, for the development going on in Redmond, some huge vaults. And, you know, we just don't have the land to get it. So then it looks at other ways to, well, what do you do then, right? And that's when you maybe get into things, can you do more things locally, as we were earlier talking about? Can there be ways instead of building something to detain, can you reduce the amount coming off, right? So can you reduce that amount of impervious area? So I guess that's a little complicated, but it's a back and forth equation between what do you have the land to control, how much do you want to control, and is there other way to prevent the runoff from coming in the first place? Did that somewhat get at it?
It does. I think what it gets at is kind of saying, I'm wondering if the city wants to be able to set goals of saying, this is how much we want to be able to be using this tool versus this tool based on a metric of saying, this is how much we need to add up at the end of the day.
That's a great
well, I mean, I think Gary in fact, Gary and I have had this discussion with the rest of some of the other stormwater staff, and that is that, you know, we want to start looking at or mapping out where we have, what do we have in terms of treatment, existing treatment already. So, you know, there's obviously new development or older developments, you know, they all have had to meet certain stormwater requirement standards for water quality treatment and detention. And over the years, that's changed. You know, the standards keep getting higher. The level of treatment it gets better and better and better. But there's still areas within the city that don't have any treatment, right? They were built before the Clean Water Act, you know, back in the 70s. So we're trying to actually get together a list, kind of a GIS layer of what areas of the city, what impervious areas within right of way and private runoff, you know, areas that are being treated, and what level of treatment do they have currently, and then looking at where we don't have treatment or maybe a low level of treatment, and then starting to prioritize, using it as a tool to prioritize where we want to, you know, put money into capturing pollutant generating surfaces, you know, and particularly, you know, high intensity use areas, commercial areas, industrial, we don't have many industrial sites, but, and then, you know, where do we get the most bang for the buck? And actually we're doing that right now. I mean, we have a grant, we just got a grant from ecology where we wanted to, what they call retrofit. And retrofitting is a term meaning, you know, areas that don't have treatment, roadways, parking lots. Can we retrofit or install a treatment system or facility that will treat that runoff, and as opposed to going directly into the creek? And we're doing that right now in downtown Issaquah. We have a grant to to go ahead and build a stormwater treatment facility to treat that runoff in a commercial area. So that's the thing that I can see. This is prioritizing those sort of projects. So I think it's a great question, and that's definitely something we're going to look at as part of this master plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Moynihan, I'm sorry, not Moynihan. Commissioner Monahan has a question.
Thanks, Kristen. Matt Monahan here. I have a question about kind of where we stand with our neighbors in the region. Are we kind of leading up front? Are we in the middle of the pack? And if there is some historical precedent of other jurisdictions doing this, have we, started asking them for lessons learned and best practices and the like, or are we going to be the trailblazers?
I can take that from my experience with one of our neighbors, Redmond, for the past 6 years, and then Seattle for 13 years, Renton, and then a consultant for a number of years around here. I will tell you that in the water quality and habitat, you guys are right now with Redmond, I'd say, one of the two leaders. And you can just look at by the grants that we get. So we're definitely at the high end on that end. And also for flood reduction as well, creek reduction. So I think we're already there. I think that the trailblazing, there would be more of the conversation we just had, which does the city want to go beyond regulatory standards for treatment and flow control? So and that's where people are. Most cities are some do. But it's not necessarily a goal or a policy. It's more of a as feasible as funding allows, right? So it's not like a target, but I think my last position at Redmond, we just finished a utility strategic plan, and we did have some far-reaching goals to 2050 for flow and water quality that I'm hoping we kind of do that here as well. So I think in summary, I think we are on the cutting edge. But we're not like we're not just like blowing everybody out of the water, but we're a top contender. And so I feel pretty proud saying that.
Next, Commissioner Boyce has a question.
Thank you, Senior Planner Lisa, and thank you, both managers, Shimmick and Quinn. Fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
And it's always fun meeting people who are so passionate about their jobs. It really came through in your presentation, comes through in your answers, and yeah, always excited to see passionate people. I think one of the reasons probably why, and I will also want to say thank you to Commissioner Monahan for that question, because that helps put things in perspective for me. I think one of the reasons probably Issaquah is up there is because of our watersheds, is because of our salmon, and because of obviously our creeks. So I guess if you're looking for a little bit of feedback, I like being on the cutting edge because our community has things that others don't, as our salmon. I don't know how much farther ahead we want to get. We still want Issaquah to be competitive.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I wanted to ask you guys, because you guys are the experts, I would think probably flooding would be one of the priorities because it has to deal with human life. And then I would think probably the riparians, having those for erosion control would be number 2, but I'm interested to hear what you guys have to think. If you guys were in charge, where would you start with? You had a fantastic graph showing some of the problems in different creeks and watersheds. What would you guys start with? Would you start addressing the flooding part first? Would you start addressing erosion control, the quality of water? I'm just interested to hear because, again, you guys have devoted your life, obviously, to this science. So I'm interested to hear what you guys would have to say if you were prioritizing this list.
Yeah, I can give you my high level, and that's a great question. I really appreciate you asking. And I'll see it. I'll say it here, and I've said it, at Redmond and at Seattle Public Utilities, and I was had a coach, with my many mentors on this. Public health and safety is first, right? And that typically means flooding here in our business. Could mean a water quality issue, but I think that's front and foremost, and probably will, if we weight something, that probably would be weighted. So I think that is key. But with that, I'd say what I have seen, I'd say over the past 5 to 10 years, typically when you are solving a flooding issue, there are ways to solve the other issues as well too, as kind of a combined project. So I'd say that's actually the highest thing I'm looking for, is those multi-beneficial projects that are solving all three. Now, again, if the caveat would be, yeah, if we just have a really serious flood issue we need to take care of, and there's really not much habitat and water quality benefit, that's fine. But if it's a moderate level flooding, compared to just alone, compared to a project that has multi benefits, I'd favor that, right? So I think that's where I'd kind of head, because it's, we just don't know what is causing the most harm at times. It's a combination of the flow, the water quality, the habitat, the sediment, and even when you get into the water chemistry, it gets so difficult. What is, it's a cocktail of pollution at times. So what really is the issue to focus on? So that's why I go to and I'm not trying to kick the can, but that multi-benefit approach would say number 2 after public health and safety. Alan, your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think I agree with you, what Gary said. Yeah, definitely public safety, life and safety is priority number 1. So I think flooding should be a high priority. But then I think you have to look at sort of the funding sources, and, generally speaking, our utility funds, stormwater utility funds, they go for the flooding, addressing the infrastructure and flooding, older pipes that are failing, culverts are failing. But like Gary said, there's sort of multi benefits. So, for example, a culvert that might be undersized, we need to increase its size and conveyance, and allow more conveyance. That we're going to upgrade it to make it fish passable. So that's going to help habitat. And then, of course, the habitat restoration projects. There's a lot of money out there for grants. And ecology will fund water quality facilities. So I think we generally want to try to go after the grants as much as we can to fund those type of projects. But once again, it goes into the prioritization and kind of how do we prioritize our funds, our utility funds, really, from the ratepayers. And so, anyways, yeah. That's
one more note on that I just about the multi-beneficial, just making it even more, making it a 3-dimensional chess game. It's not just the different types of stormwater issues. It's our friends in parks and transportation, right? I mean, if we have a project that we can do all 3 together, boy, that is going to rank very high in my book, right? A way that that's just, everybody cheers when you can do that, right? Because I think we're coming from an age many years ago, I'll date myself 10, 20 years ago, where it was, utility project, that was it, and public engineers got their way and did their projects. And I'm an engineer, and I'm sorry to say there was a lot of wrong decisions made because they just look in that engineering lens and didn't look out to their partners across the community. So I think that multi-beneficial aspect goes just beyond us in stormwater. It goes to the whole city vision.
Ron, Chair Fall has a question.
Thank you, Kristen. So question here for, I think both for Gary and for Alan. Thank you. Great questions from all the commissioners as well.
Yes.
So Jason and I serve on the recovery task force, and we learned today that Issaquah has 89% of its population has been vaccinated with at least 1 shot. To me, that tells me we're kind of cutting edge. We're one of the leading cities, not the leading city, but we're one of the leading cities. And I think when you look at Issaquah, we're a very environmentally conscious city to begin with. So I think the idea of trailblazing would be an important criteria for us, and looking at things like maybe organic filtration. I'm going to pick on the Safeway Target parking lot as possibly a great idea because they have so much asphalt. Having water runoff maybe go into an organic water cistern where it could filtrate back into the ground as opposed to becoming runoff into Lake Sammamish may help reduce toxins from like oil, car oil dripping onto the asphalt and so on. So are those projects that you are also considering, or some of the organic alternatives, the green storm runoff?
Absolutely. Yeah, Alan, you could lead out and talk about it too. But yeah, we're, that's another thing that, I've been taught over the past 10, 15 years. Just don't stick with one tool, right? There's people out there they don't trust green water infrastructure, or there's people that only want to put green infrastructure in. It's more of use the right tool, right? Because we can use hybrid approaches. So yeah, what you're going to see with this plan, and I love your idea of just we look at all technologies. We're looking at the most cost effective, right? I'm a big believer in the triple bottom line: cost, social, and environmental benefits. Look at all together. And I'm willing to pay more and for a higher technology that is going to, treat much better over time than paying for something that's just not going to do as much. And the example that popped in my mind with your comment about Safeway is Northgate in Seattle. That my staff actually worked with the owners when I was there to develop a system similar to what you talked about. The parking lot, no parking lot lot's great, but it has a lot better feel. It's got bioswales all over the place, and it's easier to walk around in the parking lot. It's safer. And that was done. Now the issue with that is that it was private property, so they had to choose to do it. It wasn't a city project. But we helped them. We supported them with the grant. We helped them get a grant for that, and then we were their technical consultants. So that's the only concern that I'd have with your example, that we're not looking at necessarily work to be done on private property unless there's a joint benefit or a benefit for the city. But that definitely could happen.
Yeah, I think from a trailblazing standpoint, I think the city's ripe for doing that. I think you'd have a lot of stakeholder interest, private and public.
Yeah, I think it's good to mention that, Puget Sound actually has some of the highest stormwater standards in the country. King County in particular, the county is a trailblazer when it comes to stormwater. And in fact, in Department of Ecology, we follow the city follows it's adopted the Department of Ecology's stormwater manual, which is and the permit, which it complies with our NPDES permit. And so we have pretty high standards already. I mean, every municipality in the state has to meet a pretty high bar compared to a lot of places. So we're already meeting, what they call enhanced treatment. So all projects, new development projects, city projects have to meet enhanced treatment, which means they have to treat heavy metals now, which they didn't have to do 10 years ago. And that includes, these systems that you're talking, with soil, amended soils that infiltrate the runoff. And then recently we've added to that what's called low impact development, which is basically saying, let's let that water infiltrate into the ground and maintain the hydrologic existing hydrology of that site, like Gary mentioned in the Stormwater 101. So all that's being implemented now as a requirement already. So I think the key now is to do it and is to go back and retrofit where there's no treatment. Yes. And to get to that high standard of treatment and flow control. That's a big part of it too. I mean, flow control, which is not just reducing flows to match, to prevent flooding, but it also reduces erosive velocities, which causes erosion, and then that causes sedimentation, turbidity, and also it's a water quality issue. So yes, that's where I see it is, let's look at where we don't have treatment or minimal treatment or, low standard treatment and upgrade it and bring it up to at least up to the current standards, which is actually pretty high. And I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with this latest emerging water quality issue, which is called 6 ppdq. I don't know if you've done it. It's basically tire material coming off of tires. It's preservative used to keep the tires, help them preserve them or whatever. Well, I guess the huge amount of research went into figuring out what's this particular chemical is actually killing coho. For some reason, it's targeting coho. So it's a big deal that they found it out. Anyhow, and right now they're looking at, okay, do the existing treatment technologies take out 6 ppdq? And in fact, City of Issaquah, we're working with UW Tacoma. They wanted to reach out to 8 communities and cities to see if they want to participate in a study to look at existing treatment facilities and do they take out this new contaminant? And we're participating in that right now. We're going to be sampling, doing stormwater sampling at some of our stormwater facilities, and to see how well they actually take out this contaminant. And I think general consensus is that that existing technologies, these amended soils, will remove this contaminant. So so I think what I'm trying to say is King County, the state of Washington, already has pretty high level of water quality standards and detention standards. So, but the question is how much higher can we go? And I'm not sure what the next level would be, but I think really the critical thing is this: let's go back and retrofit and treat what we're not treating now. So.
Well, Alan and Gary, I think we have the right people on board doing that. You guys, so
thank you.
Keep aspiring for more. But I'm really happy that you volunteered that information, because I was going to ask that next question, but you're right on top of it. So I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Commissioner Zaragoza has a question.
Thank you. So Commissioner Fall kind of answered my questions. So maybe I have more of a comment. I just want to second the goal of trailblazing. I think that's really great. Everything you guys are saying sounds fantastic. I think we all rather slow you down than kind of push you farther ahead. So this is really wonderful. Really glad to hear that we're taking part in studies for the tire dust runoff. I think that's pretty exciting. I hadn't heard that, so that's pretty amazing. So I would just love to see more, as aggressive as we can be within our means.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I think that what will be, again, I'm just looking on my screen to the identified issues. There's so many there that I think that it will really give you, when we get to showing you that, then that's when we can play different scenarios, or if how much we wanted to do, what we wanted to accomplish, what type of goals we want to have, is we'll have all the data there, right? We'll have what the issues are, what the possible solutions, some preliminary costs, and like I said, Alan and I have a zeal for this, and we can deliver up all types of scenarios, not just dollars, of course, but just targeting different, a water quality heavy scenario, a habitat heavy scenario, a mixed scenario, whatever it is, focused on one watershed. That again, it's just like having game pieces. By having this basin characterization and then the study done.
Commissioner Vader has a question.
Yeah, thanks so much for all of this. Has been really kind of great learning for me here on my very first meeting. And so I guess it's kind of a comment that I'll try to turn into a question, but kind of along this trailblazing line, I also think it's really trailblazing for you to have called out environmental justice as a priority. And so wanted to acknowledge that and kind of commend that being on that list. And then, as I was reflecting on the second question around climate change and kind of how aggressive to be towards that, my first instinct was like, of course we need to be aggressive, because this is not going away. It's only going to get worse with time. I'm from the East Coast. I love thunderstorms too, but I understand kind of what you're saying about Issaquah not being quite prepared to handle thunderstorms. But then bringing that kind of justice mindset to that question, thinking about, if we do start to design flood maps based on future state, what does that mean for insurance premiums, and that sort of thing. And so I guess, again, to kind of turn that into a question, I guess it would be, how does that kind of environmental justice and having that as a priority kind of manifest in your development of this plan?
Yeah, I could take a first cut, Alan, and then you, and if you can add stuff. What in my mind, there is it's in the criteria for each project, so that each one will get scored that. But I think there has to be some preliminary work done first, which I hadn't really thought of until you asked your question about what we need to take some look at the demographics of Issaquah to see where our areas of concern might be, that we're be aware of that before we even look at the issues, right? As I know I dealt with that in Seattle learn how to do this type of analysis there. But I think that's first too, is getting independently what areas might we be concerned about and why, and then laying that will help inform the criteria then, right? So I think that's where I'm going to go, is it's going to manifest by us. We have to develop something to bring in to make that criteria real and alive, right? And to show, so we can lay it on top of the project, right? So we can say, okay, this project is trying to solve it here. So how does it relate to this, whatever the information is, a graph, a map, or something about environmental social justice. So that's what, Alan, I think we haven't really worked on that, but that's, I think, how it will manifest. And then we want to be transparent so that we can show you, hey, this is how we're scoring, right, this line item. And we can share that with you to see, does that make sense? Are we missing something, or is this how you would apply it? So does that kind of answer where you were getting at?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think kind of the intentionality and the transparency that you just mentioned is what strikes me as kind of what it's all about. So that's great.
Commissioner Lewis has a comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Joy Lewis. When we start thinking about those 4 questions you wanted to direct kind of our discussion about tonight, in talking specifically about your question for directing climate change being and prioritization for that, I was curious about the difference between the moderate versus the aggressive balance that you mentioned. The biggest difference to me, obviously, was in the aggressive. You mentioned doing a UW coordination. Does that imply some sort of delay, or does that kind of like what is entailed in that? I'm really happy to hear Alan mention that study. For those that don't know, it's pretty easy to find online. I can send it to Kristen. But in December of 2020, it was a really landmark study, and it was really interesting to see, especially for our community, to see that tire-related chemicals are largely responsible for coho salmon deaths in urban streams, and that's before the fish can spawn, often by more than half. So it was a significant thing. I know I've talked to staff about it when it came out. And so I love hearing that we're being aggressive with this new information and keeping up with the times. And I am curious to see how that bullet point you have, coordinating with UW, kind of impacts our policy approach moving forward.
Yeah, I don't think it would. So I think any what we would, in my mind, through this plan, we would get approval from you and council on which of these to act on after the plan is adopted. So this would be we would have what I would be able to provide to you, the next time or the time after that, is what the scope of work would be for each of these and the cost to implement that and the pros and cons. So you have that to look at. And then once the plan's adopted, then we would move on that. So it would actually it'd be a project by itself, right? It would come after the plan. So it wouldn't hold this up. But some things will be, like I said, so it gets to be a question of how fast it could be implemented. So the first one, the minimal approach design standards, yeah, we could do that relatively easy, right? That's going to be changing our design standards, but it'll take a little while to enact it for new projects. But the last one, yeah, that's going to take good year, 2 years, right, to actually just do all the modeling necessary, and it's a long effort to begin. So to summarize, we weren't looking, and my mistake if I didn't make that clear, we weren't looking at doing this work within the context of the plan, but after the plan's adopted, we would start on that.
Thank you. That clarification helps so much.
You're welcome.
I don't have any more questions or comments in the chat box.
So Kristen got a question for the commissioners. So Alan and Gary gave us 3 questions. Well, what are the commission's thoughts on the proposed criteria to prioritize the issues and actions? How aggressive should the city be in addressing the climate change within the context of this plan? And should the city develop a policy and guide funding across the stormwater and our programs? Do we want to go through, make sure every commissioner can comment on those 3 questions so that Gary and Alan can walk away with some answers. We asked a lot of questions, not necessarily related to those 3 questions. Do you want to hear your feedback, your thoughts? Do we want to spend 30 seconds and go through the list individually? Crickets. Okay. All right. I guess not. So, being that there are no other questions, Gary, Alan, thank you very much for an awesome presentation. I think that was.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. One comment just popped up from Commissioner Milligan.
Oh, excellent.
I'll come in and help you out, Chair Fall. Thank you.
We,
To respond to your request for us and the crickets that you're hearing, it's a lot to absorb right now, and for us to coalesce around some actionable response to the first 3 would take a lot of work, and it's already after 9 o'clock, and so you know what happens.
Exactly.
And so I think that it's not without interest and desire to give you that response, but I think that the conversation has given you a flavor for the kinds of things. And if perhaps my suggestion to the chair could be, you could do a round robin, Chair, on question number 4 and allow the commissioners to have everybody to have a fair chance, now that we've had all this discussion, to maybe focus in on something, and maybe that would give a more concrete response. I think it's just too big a lift to do those first 3 tonight. That's what I think.
I would actually agree with that. So that was good feedback, Nina.
Yes, thank
But
you.
you said question 4. I don't see question 4.
I should have that up on the screen.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So that's the more of the and some of you actually already answered this already too. So I just do want to say I got a lot out of this, and I think Alan did too. So for for 1, 2, 3, and 4, I'd be happy to hear your responses individually for 4. But just to let you know, I'm going to be rewatching this again to get to listen to all of you again and transcribe it. But great stuff. So thank you very much. I got what I needed from you. I really appreciate it.
Excellent. Excellent. Here to help. Okay, so I don't see any more questions coming up. And so I think, Kristen, we are ready to go to reports.
Thank you again.
There we go. Hi. So actually, I think you all will be thrilled at 9:13 to know that I don't have any council reports. And there is no one waiting to make a public comment.
Okay, excellent. Other business announcements? And
I do have that. This is Kristen again. I should note that our director, Community Planning and Development Director, Minnie Dollywall, met with the City Council Title 18 Task Force on the 18th. And actually, there she is. She may want to fill in. But they sort of rounded out their discussion, and Minnie will be bringing to us on the 27th sort of where we're going with that, the anticipated outcomes, why we're doing it, the proposed scope of work, and a schedule. But Minnie, do you want to fill in?
Sure. Good evening, everyone, and welcome, Sarah, Commissioner Vader. We'll be back in front of you with a sort of like a roadmap with that we met with our Title 18 ad hoc committee, which is made up of 3 council members today, and we're almost there in terms of finalizing the schedule, the breaking up into chunks that'll come in front of you. So there's a fair amount of work that this group will be involved with, and we'll share the details at the next meeting of what the different phases and groupings of those code amendments look like for you, and what the public outreach plan associated with it will be. So we'll save that for next meeting. I know it's late, so appreciate everyone's very engaging conversation on stormwater, and I'm getting excited about stormwater issues, listening in to all the discussion. So that's all I have, Kristen.
Thank you. I do have one other thing for you all to think about, not to discuss tonight, but in November, we do have a lot of Title 18 topics, and November will be right after our comprehensive plan public hearing. And the November 11th meeting will be canceled because it's Veterans Day. The next meeting is canceled because it's Thanksgiving. I would like to have a meeting in November. I think we've got a lot to cover. So if you all could just, not tonight, but take a look at your calendars and see what would be best for you, and I can run it by the clerk's office and make sure that we can get it in there. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So I think we will go to adjournment. And there's no further business before the commission. I will adjourn the meeting at 9:16.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.